2-1. Recordings in progress. All right, Lafayette Lee's back. What's going on, brother?
Hey, just living the dream over here. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. You are living the dream. It's a dream world. Um, it's been a few years. Well, at least a year. I don't know. Maybe it has been a few years, but I always love having you on because you're kind of like Grandpa when he comes on, and I say that in the fact that the stuff you write and say, like when you've done it on X or when you do your newsletters or your Substacks, whatever you want to call them, like you say the things in a much more articulated way than people like myself who are just like rage tweeting sometimes, right?
I rage tweet too. It's okay.
Yeah, but it's
I
very
have to
different. It's
say,
an elegant rage tweeting as opposed to like I'm the bourbon drinking guy who's just like, man, you're stupid.
sometimes that's the best way to do it, though. Honestly, I'm working on being more straightforward, probably like I was in the military. I
Mhm.
get verbose, and Braxton always says, like, I'm always doing this flowery stuff, and probably benefit from being a little more straightforward.
Braxton, I don't know if you know this or not, but Braxton and I have somewhat of a pseudo baseball rivalry. He really thinks he's going to hit my changeup one day, and like we're slowly getting to that point where we're going to meet, and he's going to find out. And I'm just gonna. I keep telling him you're expecting this changeup, and I'm just going to throw at your shins what's left of him.
That's sounds like Braxton.
Yeah,
He wants to wrestle
he
when
does.
he
That's
wants to
fine.
fight me.
All right. Well, real quick before we get started, as always, this is brought to us by America's Native Spirit, which is only partially in this bottle, but we got in honor of not just Lee, but a lot of the boys that we hang out in the GC with. Devil's Brigade whiskey. It is from, well, it's not from there, but all right, let me just read this because I'm going to screw it up if I try and give my own impression right. So, quote, the worst is yet to come. This was written on the death cards placed upon dead Nazis by the Devil's Brigade. Officially known as 1st Special Service Force, the Devil's Brigade trained at Fort Harrison near Helena, Montana, where I just was recently, and was comprised of backcountry rangers, soldiers, lumberjacks, North woodsmen, hunters, prospectors, explorers, game wardens, and mountain men who volunteered to join the secretive unit in 1942 during World War II. The Joint American Canadian Commando Unit was known for their stealth and skill with the Victor Ford II dagger and had quickly gained the nickname, quote, Black Devils, and a reputation for the fierce style of fighting at night in blackened faces. Made of 60% of American bourbon and 40% Canadian whiskey, just like the percentage of men assigned to the unit. The blend of whiskeys is our way of honoring the bravery and valor of those men who fought in World War II with distinction. The legacy continues with current American and Canadian Special Operations Forces who trace their lineage and heritage to the, quote, force men. And a portion of this is donated to Special Forces Association, Chapter 28, Devil's Brigade Chapter, nonprofit based in Montana. And this bottle specifically honors First Lieutenant Wesley Bullock, and this is batch 20, and that's where it says that. So there you go. That's pretty cool shit, man. I had no idea like what I was walking into when I got there. And it's 84 proof, so 42%. Not too bad. Nice and drinkable. Yeah. That's pretty cool. Like I was just walking through like the DFAC and I'm like, what is this first special? What is it called? First Special Service Force. I'm like, what is that? And then like someone, it was either you or maybe it was Nick squared me away. I was like, oh shit, I had no idea. And then next thing you know, I've got bottles of this stuff. And it's like, how cool is that story? Like, do you know anything about those dudes?
I've just heard some. I've heard like the scuttlebutt. Like I just know like the wave tops. But yeah, I love. I mean, it's not my. That's not the time period. Like everybody like loves talking about that time period. It
Yeah.
seems these days. I'm actually not much of an expert, so I kind of keep mum about it. But no, definitely a cool story. Like
It is. It's like a really cool, like that's the thing with whiskey and bourbon, right? You got to have some sort of cool like legend to go with it. And what's better than like, could we even do something like this, do you think? Like with this type of people? Could we do that today still?
I think, yeah. Well, I will say, I think that I would say by and large, you have a much smaller pool to pull from.
Yeah.
But I also think that, I do think that there are always going to be that, that cream at the very top everywhere. You know what I mean? I think there's
Yeah.
always going to be guys like that. But at the same time, I think that you're dealing with you were dealing with a deeper bench back then.
Yeah. All right. So there was two things right off the top, and then obviously this always goes wherever the bourbon takes me, but I want to go back to last July when that first assassination attempt happened on President Trump when he was in Pennsylvania. When you saw, because I think we were all in the chat just kind of talking our normal shit and reacting and all, but like, what was your honest reaction to the fact that like it was literally that close to that dude being dead on national TV?
Oh yeah, it was horrifying. I mean, I've been ride or die with Trump for a very long time,
Mm.
and still am. But at that point, you know, I it's that same kind of formula where something like that happens, something horrifying, unprecedented, unexpected, and the everybody who is asking questions gets browbeaten by all the people with a little more influence for even asking questions or for thinking something looks off. And my whole take on it was like we have every reason to look at this as a strange like event. It's this is it was. I mean, let's be like you set the stage. It's like this person has been hounded relentlessly by his political adversaries. They've justified all sorts of shenanigans against him, whether it's lawfare or even spying on him, targeting him in different ways, stoking resentment and hatred of him and his supporters for years, likening him to a dictator. So, like these conditions are ripe for us, some kind of event like that. And so, I definitely think that this gets overplayed whenever there's like a tragedy or a close call, or sadly enough, like when people get killed in shootings. There's always that crowd that will say so and so has their blood on their hands. But like, I really felt like, not only did Trump dodge a bullet, we dodged a bullet. And
Yeah.
I definitely hold a lot of people responsible for what happened. I don't know all the details. I think there's a lot of weirdness about how it went down. But I can confidently say, without having to go into too much speculation, that something like that would have never happened uh, had Trump's political opponents treated him like just another political candidate rather than the second rise of Hitler. And that's like something that I think is really sick about the culture that we're in right now.
Yeah.
And I worry about that a lot because that kind of thing doesn't just like dissipate easily.
No, it doesn't. And to follow up on, because I remember talking to Clay Martin about this, and I was like, well, that dude who made that shot and was ultimately killed, and then all the stuff that conveniently happened around him, like from his phone being erased to like his entire apartment being completely sanitized, like nothing in it. Do you think that dude just woke up one day and was like, I'm gonna go try and kill former President Trump? Or like, do you really think like this dude was put up to that? And if he was, like I said to Clay at the time, like they're not exactly sending their best here. Even the
Well,
guy who did the round two attempt over when is in Florida, like they're not exactly sending like what we think of when we think of these scenarios, right? It's not Jason Bourne going up to the fucking guy.
yeah, I don't know really how to judge it. I do know that I mean, we all know that there was a massive failure. At the very least, it was
Yeah.
a massive failure, and we do know that incompetence is a major problem. But with a situation like this, I just returned to I don't think that you don't have a more than one attempt on President Trump's life if he were treated or if the conditions were like they were maybe 30, 40 years ago. And that, I hold a lot of people responsible for that. And I don't know, like, if there are machinations behind the scenes, putting people up to things like this. I mean, I don't know exactly how that looks, but I don't think it's outside the realm of possibilities that you can radicalize a significant number of Americans through the normal institutional channels that we have to do something like that. And I think that kind of coincides with, past historical events and some of the practices that supposedly were discontinued decades ago. But, at the very least, to be, responsible as I can, no, I don't, I'm open to all sorts of possibilities at this point. I, I think we have to take a step back because taken in isolation, and it is safe to, it's always good to it's always good to just, take information slowly and try to digest it and think critically. But, um, you know, let's be real. We are now in 2025. We now know that COVID was not what we thought, or at least what we were supposed to think. Um, there's it's high likelihood that this virus came from a lab. It was funded partially through U.S. tax dollars. It was known by people who were in charge of a lot of the policy around the pandemic. And like that has almost been completely like you wouldn't, if you just read newspapers, if you're, 30 years from now and you're trying to understand what happened during the pandemic and you're reading what journalists write, you would have no idea how deep the corruption around that event goes. And that goes to show also for like President Biden is that now, we know that not only was he basically incapacitated throughout his presidency, but a lot of major decisions were being made by people close to him that were not elected, right? Outside of the purview of the American people. And, journalists basically covered it up. And, there's a good chance that he was also suffering from having prostate cancer at that point. And who knows if he was even given appropriate treatment given all of the secrecy around this. So like, I mean, you can go down the list of all these things that have happened. So when we look at an event like a near miss of who is now the president of the United States narrowly dodging a bullet, like I'm open to all sorts of possibilities. It's horrifying, frankly.
And honestly, like I go back to it. I know I kind of mocked it, like, "Hey, they're not exactly sending their best here," but that dude did make that shot, and
Yeah.
one of them actually was a good shot. Like Trump just turned at the opportune time, and what happened, as opposed to the worst possible scenario.
I mean, I look at that, frankly. I mean, I am not ashamed to say it. To me, it's a miraculous event.
100%.
If there
100%.
is such a
Yeah.
thing as a miracle, that was probably the closest thing I've ever
Yeah.
seen.
And then the argument to that, Lee, was like, "Oh, why would God save such a horrible person like Trump?" It's like, okay, no one's a saint on this earth, right? God has used people for his plan many times throughout history, very documented. And they're not exactly the best people at times, but they're used for good. And
Right.
everything that's happened to Trump since then, like, I'm sorry. I've I've been a huge like proponent of Trump. I've been very anti-Trump at times throughout his presidency before. Definitely when he left during the like, I mean, you're in the same fucking chat. Like, I'm not like blatant, like blind 100%. But what I've seen that man become since then, like that dude has to still be here for a reason. And I genuinely think the more people in the media, in the left, in the like that side of things oppose him, he has to be here doing this for a reason. Because you've talked about this, I think, before, not just here, but I know you've written about it. But he has no incentive to do any of this.
Right. I
Like
mean,
the dude is,
he could have had a much better by the things that we measure as being
yeah, he
to
doesn't
us.
need any of this shit.
He could have had a great life just by taking a seat and not talking politics and just maybe keeping it to his family and
Chilling.
friends.
Yeah.
But he chose to do this, and not only that. I mean, I think about, and this is for anybody, even if they don't. I'm taking a bit of a break from politics these days just to kind of get my wits about me and focus on other things for a moment. But at the same time, for people that might not be as tuned into politics, I mean, just think about what kind of intestinal fortitude it took to not only get narrowly escape death, but also at the same time continue to run your campaign, continue to
Mhm.
hold events, and to keep that up. I mean, not only the strain on the individual, Trump, which by the way, I would be remiss to like miss this part, is that when he was shot at, and it obviously like it grazed him, he got up,
They stood up.
stood up. I mean,
That fight, like
I don't
that's
care who
fucking,
you are, that
that's
moment.
cool as shit.
That as some, I look at that and that's admirable to me. And no
Yeah.
anybody who would do that is
Yeah.
admirable to me, regardless of their politics. But that guy showed in that split second what he was made of. And
Mhm.
so to me, it's like you see an event like that, but what kind of strength did that take for him to run? to be able to work with his family, who was probably terrified that he would,
Oh, of
be.
course. And he's
And
got young kids and grandchildren. Like they watched this happen. Like this is no longer just like, oh, I saw a newspaper. No, everyone sees this shit in real time.
right, right, and then to have people slander you and to say horrible things
Like, oh,
about you.
I wish he wouldn't have missed. Like,
Yeah, I just,
we're the worst
you know, at that point, like I was already well, well in deep in the ranks of being a Trump supporter. But
Yeah.
yeah, that one, I just felt
Man,
like it.
that honestly, like the reaction to it would kind of like, I hate to say it, but that kind of radicalized me a little bit.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
think
it's just
it's a
like
lot of people.
these fucking people are not people that I ever want to actually come to agreement with on anything because we don't share anything in common anymore. Like
Right. I mean,
no humanity. And now everyone's supposed to feel bad about the President Biden, right? And it's like, okay, we'll show you some of that, but where was that when fucking Trump's getting shot?
right, right. I mean, yeah, I just, I think that horrible people are everywhere, and then they can wear
Yep.
all sorts of different stripes. But I will say, I do think that there's something particularly nasty on the left. I think there's nastiness on the right. Don't get me wrong,
No,
but
for
like
sure. Yeah.
it gets spotlighted constantly, and there's a lot of social pressure to root out that sort of a thing. But there's kind of like a almost the difference is that people on the right the nasty people on the right tend to openly admit that they're being nasty and horrible, and recognizing that maybe the things that they say or do are horrible things. They still do them, right? But there seems to be an acknowledgement by even the worst actors that that they know that they're riding, they're skirting the line or whatever. The difference, though, that I find is the amount of self righteousness that I see from some of the more nasty elements on the left is that they couch this. It's almost dishonest, right? It's like they couch these horrible things that they say and believe and desire as like virtues, and that's where I think things kind of depart. I know you'll kind of see that across the political spectrum, but it's particularly egregious on the left, where it reminds me honestly, like if you go back and you kind of you look at the ideological evolution of the right and the left in America, particularly in the 20th century, you know, you kind of see this with like the tacit approval of like liberals being able to kind of excuse the communists in their midst.
Mhm.
These guys are like calling for liquidating the bourgeoisie. With liquidating being quite a strong word. Like, what does that look
Yeah.
like?
Right.
It's pretty intense, right? Like, and there's a lot of people that for decades excused that sort of a thing in their own midst, excused the Soviet Union as and taking a position that it was like the virtuous position. And I just don't quite see that quite the same way on the right. I know I'm biased, but I just don't really see that. I see that there's the self righteousness is pretty bad on the left, and it's so obvious with Trump how they address him.
Yeah. I just saw this just pop up before we started doing this was like Jake Tapper's out there now talking about how like what a horrible person Hunter Biden is because of like the things I'm like, dude, come on. Like, and now that dude's out there, of course, selling a book. So now he's like all about, it's time to be honest and have an honest discussion about the President Biden. It's like, dude,
Right.
come
Now
on.
the
Like,
now the
do
moment
people
is
even buy
past.
this shit anymore?
Yeah, it's frustrating, man. I mean, I just I get really and this is just a general observation, not to even take it politically necessarily, but I don't like I I don't I don't like this culture that we're all kind of saddled with. I don't like that politics has to be. I mean, politics matters, and so I'm not one of those people who thinks that
Yeah.
politics is stupid or completely like a waste of time. But there's a difference between the influence wars and just there's like a lot of like mental illness that gets siphoned up into a political, being a political expression that I just hate how much it has destroyed our social fabric and our
Yeah.
culture, people's mental states. And I hate that politics is the vehicle for that, because politics really, like, I mean, it's very, if it's true that politics is like war by other means, I mean, it can't really burn itself out until something really really bad happens. And I just I do. I mean, I'm a child of of a better era. And like I miss when like the crazy liberal lady down the street, like she was just like and she's just like another person in the community, and maybe she didn't cut her grass, or she like had her crystals around her neck, or listened to the Grateful Dead or whatever. But like we could still maintain some
Yeah.
kind of intact social fabric, and we could get along to some degree. There's like a sense of like civic mindedness that transcends the
Yeah.
politics of like the national politics. And now it's just everything is so it's just drowning in this really rotten political culture. And I will say, I am kind of optimistic, even though it doesn't sound like it. I think real politics, like what politics really is, I think a figure like Trump can have a very good effect, because he practices politics in a very old school way. I mean, this guy seems to be like a throwback to like the 19th century in a lot of ways, and in the better ways. He speaks in a way that is more like that 19th century populist. He communicates with people in a certain way, and he practices pragmatic politics. So liberals tend to get really hung up on like the quote unquote offensive things that he says, that are kind of like, he commits faux pas according to their, to the liberal framework. But really, like what Trump is doing is he's practicing pragmatic politics. And I think that that's really important, because that's what the American people should be able to do, is like political issues that are germane to me in my individual setting, in my sphere of influence. I should be able to practice politics, and this other, all this other stuff, these national charades and all this nonsense should really not have to interfere with that. And I think that what I like is Trump seems to be breaking against ideology on, not only the liberal ideology, but he's also breaking against what has been the conservative ideology in a lot of ways. And I really think that the ideological component of politics, how important that is really kind of an artifact of the 20th century. I hope it goes away. And I think Trump is the kind of person who's thankfully breaking that down.
Do you I was going to take it to the other direction, but let me go here. So we're past that 100-day mark. I know we've all kind of enjoyed watching Trump get in there and do a lot of the stuff with the executive orders. But to pick up on what you just said about how he's changing the conservatives as well, but what is what is your take on where Congress is right now? Because they're not really doing anything to back what he's doing. Like they're not codifying anything through legislation. Like executive orders are cool, but they don't mean anything once he's gone.
Right.
So right, so it's like what are they actually waiting for? Is my question. Do you think?
So here's my take on that, is that, so like Trump he's our chief executive. He has been elected by the people. So Trump as the executive is really expression of the most, really like the most pure expression of democratic will that we
Mhm.
have in Washington. A lot of people don't like to hear that. They want to like cling to notions of like an imperial presidency and all this nonsense. But really, if you want to see a Democrat, somebody representing voters across the country, you can't find a better expression of that than the president, which is
Yeah.
Donald Trump. So he is diverging from Congress and from a lot of the rest of Washington. And there's something to remember, though, like historically, and I don't really like how this is, but it is what it is that, Congress has always kind of been like this. It's a, this is kind of like a den of thieves. It always has been. Like there's not really like a golden age of, there were times of like maybe during like extreme national growth in like the 1840s, where you have like Congress with like really capable, well, in the very beginning, you kind of have this turnover from like your revolutionary generation that are very radical, like what people today, liberals would say, are radicalized. Like you get your like really hot-headed types that help push the revolution into being a revolution. That eventually, with the Constitution, after the Articles of Confederation, you get these new kind of cohorts of representatives. I think, by and large, much more capable and erudite than anybody we have in there now. Part of that is because of the way voting was back then and elections. But you have these like cohorts in the very early days of the American Republic that are very capable. You have like your Henry Clays and your John C. Calhouns and Daniel Websters. They're like, these guys are like, I'm talking like, these are like geniuses compared to the people we have today. Like, I mean, I'm like, we're talking like Einstein, gap here. These guys really understood, like they understood the needs of the country, and they really pushed Congress into being very proactive about helping the country to grow and adjust to the new conditions that they were living under. Obviously this all changes in the war. There's, a lot, Reconstruction, all that stuff kind of puts a lot of this spirit on hold. But the point I'm making is Congress, has more often than not been just a den of thieves and a temple of corruption. And I'm not saying that as like some like boomer conservative. It's just a fact. And that's kind of like what it's meant to be. When you say that Congress has the power of the purse, these guys, most of these people, their job is, to them, really, like what drives them is to make money for themselves and to expand their influence for themselves. And this is kind of like their ticket into a different lifestyle. And they're not very civically minded. These are not very intelligent people by and large. Like really, they're really not. And that is hard for some people to grasp, but they're not very smart people. Think about this, is how denigrated our politics are today. These are the people that excel in that environment. What does that tell you? And so they're always going to be a problem. Congress is always going to be wanting to spend lots and lots of money. They don't have, as an institution, they are not really concerned with driving the nation into bankruptcy or anything like that. And the Senate, on the other side, their job has kind of always been to protect the institution. These are the institution being, the legislature. Yeah. And so what you're dealing with is a president who, and really kind of like the GOP has always been like this. Like people, like there hasn't really
been, suck. They're fucking pointless.
Yeah, like there hasn't really, like, I'm saying this as somebody who is on the Trump train for sure, but like, and I'm a Republican, but the Republican Party has always kind of been a function, when you like leave the 19th century, always been kind of a lapdog to major corporate interests. The Democratic Party was always the more, like, literally like the more democratic and often populist party. And that is completely flip-flop. So you're kind of dealing with
that wild. That switched.
Oh yeah. But now you're dealing with a party that is never cared about voters for the most part as a party, about voter interest. And they're trying to make all the right noises. And really, like, the breath of fresh air was Trump. Like he's a complete change to the way that party has operated for most of its history. And so, you're dealing with this institution that has never really pretended to serve the people. It claims to, but it doesn't. And think about this, like, just for people that actually think Congress cares that much about you, think about this. Like, if let's say that you go to Washington, like Mr. Smith goes to Washington.
Yep, Mr. Smith goes.
Yeah, you go in there, you're going to help the folks back home. Well, like, what happens when you get to Congress, right? Well, if you want to pass legislation, you gotta have some influence, and you gotta have something to give. You also have to be on committees. How do you get put on committees? How long does it take to be at the, chair a committee? Like this stuff, like at the end of the day, like if you're a junior congressman, how democratic is the House of Representatives in and of itself? It's not. And so all that to say, Trump is having to really deal with a reluctant Congress. Like the GOP is just going to do just fine if they do a bunch of silly hearings and try to drive in donations and nothing happens, because like they don't really have any vision as a party. They're not really there to help people to change their lives. That's kind of what Trump's ambition is. And so Congress is going to be just fine whether they get with the program or they don't. That's how they perceive it. So he's dealing with that, and then he has to deal with the hostile judiciary at the same time. And so, it's a tough thing. And so my whole take on Congress, I don't expect much from them. It is sad because I think things could radically. Last thing I'll say. Last time we had really fundamental change in this country, like systemic change, would probably be during the New Deal and then after World War II. But I kind of see that chapter as like all connected. And one of the big reasons is the president had Congress completely, Congress was at his mercy in a lot of ways. And so Congress basically gave him the keys to the castle and let him do whatever he wanted. And that is why we are living in kind of the remnants of that regime that came about in the 30s and then really got codified in like the 40s and 50s. So, you know, we're dealing with a really outdated, old regime way of doing things. We're $35 trillion in debt. That's not because, you know, that's not because we've had really, everybody likes to blame the president, but like, again, who has the power of the purse? It's
Yeah.
not the president, it's Congress. And so, you know, we're dealing with that. You know, we're dealing with that leopard and with the same old spots. And so I, I will say though, if anybody is going to break the gridlock, if anybody's going to be able to get anything, you know, push this through just through pure will, it would be somebody like Donald Trump. But I don't really have much faith in Congress.
Yeah, and I mean, it wasn't that long ago when Obama was in this same position. He had the House and the Senate in 2008, and then they got crushed in 2010 during the midterms. But even then, like, they could have done all this shit that we were fear-mongered about. And yeah, of course, everyone did something, but they didn't do that much, right? Like, I mean, let's be honest.
Well, like when we, yeah, exactly. Well, that's kind of the thing is that, you know, we're living in the shadow of the 20th century. I mean, these two parties, they diverge on some domestic issues. Foreign policy, they don't diverge at all for the most, and on anything substantive. And if you think about it, you know, we just came out, we didn't just come out, but you know, the way things are, were set up and kind of really established to stave off economic depression and to win wars and win a Cold War. So like this is the operating system. It does kind of function like an operating system. This is the software. And why I think like I've been so excited by Trump is that he really is kind of like these democratic mechanisms have been, you know, they've really ossified. They don't work the way that, you know, anybody wants them to, at least for ordinary folks. And Trump is kind of like this really probably the purest expression of democratic will I've seen in my lifetime. And we're going to watch him in the arena. And so like, you know, he's up against everybody. He's like up against his own party. He's up against the other two branches of government that don't really want him to succeed. And it's kind of him and us, you know, it's him and all of us who are behind him. And so it's an exciting time. I try not to, you know, I think the best way for people to get real worked up about this is I would say, you know, read a lot of history. It helps you kind of calm down and realize that like, you know, really good times are kind of an aberration and to kind of find some peace that even when politics doesn't seem to improve our lives very much, there are other things to live for. But I am rooting for Trump. I think, like I said, I think he's like a once in a century kind of figure. And if anybody's going to pull a rabbit out of their hat, it's going to be him.
Yeah, I was gonna bring this up. That's a good point. But going back, I know you touched on something with Congress. Like, yeah, so that's how we end up today with someone like Nancy Mace. Like, I'm gonna go show my tits on the floor. Like, who asked for this? Like, it's just so fucking like I can't take that person seriously. And I'm glad Tim Walsh, who's got a huge fucking platform, obviously. Is it Tim Walsh? What the Walsh? No,
I
Matt Walsh. I'm sorry.
oh, yeah.
He's just like, I can't believe people, there anyone who's calls himself conservative can still take this woman seriously and always falls for her bait. It's just like, yeah, but like, why are we even, why is this person just, why is she even doing this shit? It's just fucking ridiculous. Like, that's the stuff that's going on in Congress. But then here's this piece of, like, real, I called it stunning and brave. I don't know if you know who Rep. Tim Burkett is from Tennessee, but he said, just
Yeah.
before you came on here. Yeah, quote, staffers operating President Biden's auto pen were allegedly taking payoffs in exchange for pardons. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Why are we learning about this now? Why didn't he speak up when this was going on if he witnessed this? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, I tend to really like him for, you know, in the Congress, but I will say like no, I know what you mean. I mean, this is kind of the problem is that we're dealing with a situation that I don't really think that a lot of members of Congress from the Republican Party really care that much about a lot of this stuff. Like you intimated, I mean, a lot of this is to basically drive up the attention. Doesn't make what happened right, but like we knew this was happening because, like, how many of us really didn't know that Joe Biden was basically
Fucking wild, man.
Completely, yeah, he was completely incapacitated as president, like he was not there. So, like, of course, this sort of a thing was happening, and that it just, I think, the better way for people to process things is just try to kind of take a step back from the personalities and the illusion, because it becomes kind of like an illusion around the machine, and look at the parts of the machine. You know, uh, it's interesting that you could have an incapacitated president and everything just kind of kept on going, right? I mean, they didn't go well. I didn't like them, but they just kind of kept on running, right? So, kind of like, what does that tell you about the nature for people that scream about democracy, whatever that even means? Like, what does that kind of tell you about the nature of uh, of like what kind of input an ordinary citizen of this country really has over the functionings of government? And I think it's kind of interesting that, like, you could, like, it's not a showstopper if even the head of state, the president of the United States, is not there. Now, I don't think that the president now is not there. I definitely think Donald Trump is, and I think this is actually why he gets a lot of his enemies really worked up, is that he actually does want to use the powers of the presidency to do something.
Yeah.
Um, but I think sometimes we need to have a hard we need to have a hard heart to heart about what it means to really be a democracy in 2025, because yeah, okay, so I go and I vote in elections. I mean, the Soviets voted in elections too. But you know if you really believe that our votes steer the ship of state, I would just point at Joe Biden and say, how? And I think that that's kind of the real interesting question. And, like, obviously, yes, you can go and campaign and fundraise on this and be like, how outrageous, give me some money and I'll go to Congress and I'll spend some money for you.
Yeah.
But, like, none of this really gets addressed. Like, you don't see Congress really. I mean, here's the thing is, like, what will prevent, apart from what Donald Trump is already doing? So what has Congress done to prevent another pandemic? And I don't just mean a virus leaking out and, afflicting everyone. What is Congress, especially those who campaigned on this, what is Congress doing to prevent another overreach of power that we saw, where you basically have, like, some random bespectacled fake, like, doctor who's just really a bureaucrat telling people day to day whether, how far apart they can stand, and, like, how to wear their mask, and, like,
I can't believe we lived through that.
dictums, right? And so it's like, when you say, like, what is Congress? Okay, so now we're in the we're in the hot seat. So, like, what's Congress doing to make sure that never happens? And they're not doing anything. So, like, like, and so that's kind of the thing, is I think that a lot of people want to believe that Congress is going to be like, that their representatives that they vote for are, like, steering this ship of state. And, like, if you just look at a hearing and you watch even, like, a senator talking to somebody like Anthony Fauci, I mean, he's, like, talking to him like a child talks to their parent rather than the other way around. Like, you have to ask the question, who works for who here?
Yep.
And that's kind of the answer.
So do you think, like, remember that term during the bailouts in 2008, like, too big to fail? Like, are we just too big to fail?
That's a good question. You mean like the whole,
Like the whole thing, like, because
right?
yeah, you saw Biden, whatever, they just parroted him out when they needed to, but clearly somebody else was doing everything. Like we
Well,
just
I think that's a good question, and I look at this as, I don't think that there's I think our tendency is to, like, expect things like collapses to happen. I mean,
yeah.
I really don't know what happens when you go beyond $35 trillion of debt in terrible times. So, like, I don't know.
You go
They're praying.
crypto, you go crypto. We don't need to
Yeah,
do
I mean, maybe there's, like, a solution to this, but, like, I mean,
Bitcoin.
yeah, and I don't really know where you go if things get bad, and, like, you have 40 million foreign. I don't remember the number. Maybe it's like 40 million foreign nationals living in your country that aren't traditional citizens. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what you do when you have hostile power that has, like, flooded your universities with, like, money and spies and all. I don't know all this stuff. I don't know what happens when that gets too far, but I will say that, like, systems don't tend to collapse, complex systems, and we live in a complex system. They tend to evolve, they transform. And that's kind of what you even see. Like, I brought up the old New Deal regime and,
Yeah.
becoming powerful during the Cold War. And basically that's what we're stuck with now. You it didn't collapse, right? Like the depression did not collapse the government. In fact, the government evolved and it kind of radically transformed. So I think you're going to see radical transformations. The big question is, and what matters to me as an ordinary person and as a God-fearing American, is how do we retain our humanity under a complex system that almost acts independent of the human lives, the human beings it supposedly represents. So if this system, I can look at someone like Donald Trump, and I do believe he represents me. JD Vance is somebody who I would say out of any politician I've seen in my lifetime, like more reflects somebody like me than almost anybody who's ever supposedly represented me. But apart from
100%.
that, what does this system, like if this system no longer operates according to my interests or will as a voter, as a citizen, what happens when too much is too much, and it sees ordinary people and human lives as a hindrance to its growth and its expansion, and its profiting. And that's what worries me, the most. And this is kind of why, like, I do think that the answer outside of this, like where we should as people be, apart from devouring politics, is we really need to regain a sense of our humanity. And I think that we need to jealously hold tightly to those things, and I know that it sounds cliche, but like having a normal, healthy life, cultivating your family, being a part of your community, and engaging in projects and activities that make you feel like a human, like playing baseball. I'm a big believer in that. So like things like that.
Thursday night, bro. Come on out and watch. We're
Yeah,
going.
I mean, it might not save the country, but it might just save you. And that's the
Yeah.
kind of thing that, like, when you're just a drop in the bucket, okay, I can trace my ancestry back to 1605 in this country,
Yeah.
but some dude from El Salvador can come in here and get a free hotel room. And,
Yeah. It's
you know
fucking.
what I'm saying?
That's,
So it's like at the end of the day, like, what can somebody like me do apart from flexing on politics? And I really think we have to recover our sense of who we are and make sure that we are keeping our sanity. And I'm talking almost like Biden's still the president, because I think things are pretty bad. I think things are improving now. I'm not bleak about it. I really am happy about the president now. But the point is, people are going to realize that there are challenges, that they're not going to get everything that they want. It just happens. It's how politics is.
right.
And there has to be more to life than getting everything you want politically.
So that brings me up to a good point. You talked about like where humanity is, etc. So it was definitely last year sometime, may even be longer, but obviously we got AI taking over everything. And I think I was listening to a Joe Rogan episode with Sam Altman. I think he's the guy behind OpenAI. But they got into a discussion about, where AI is eventually going to go, how it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point. Like it is what it is. It's like nothing's slowing it down, nothing's going to stop it. Um, but what if AI got to a point where it becomes the world government, right? Like it's created,
Super intelligence.
yeah,
Like
like it's created a system to where it's the best possible political system for everybody on the planet at that time, and it just makes decisions, and people allow it to make decisions for everyone, right? Like that's unfortunate. Like just the stuff that you and I've probably been involved in at some point. Like it's very feasible. And it seems something like that's why I brought up the question, like, are we too big of a system to fail? Like, do we even need this person as a figurehead? That was part of like a Joe Rogan thing in 2016 on his comedy thing, was just like the country, like one guy in charge of 300 million people. It's fucking dumb. And it's like, okay, it's very funny to hear that, but it's also like what you just got done describing. Like we literally just lived through who knows how much of the last 4 years where it seemed like the guy wasn't really there, but everything's just going on. So, do you think we could really get to a point where let's just take the human element out of it at this point? Let's just leave it up to AI, see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I've thought a lot about it. I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. I'm a pretty boring, like, technologically illiterate person. But I look at this and I think, we've seen this we talked about systems and how complex systems will evolve and change according to the conditions that they live in. This is one of the reasons why, and I've just had to kind of stay away from social media because I almost can't help but respond. But there's like this big campaign nowadays of like classical liberals running around. I mean, these are just like rebranded libertarians, and they're going around and they're saying we need to like hold to our libertarian, like they're what they would call their classically liberal principles, and like, it's nice, and I love Adam Smith, and I like reading,
Yeah, we all do. But that's like,
yeah, I mean, great. I'm not a
400 years ago. Great.
but at the end of the day, it's like complex systems evolve
Yep.
and ideologies evolve alongside them. Like half of what people think they know about the world and their country and their history is really kind of been boiled in the Cold War, when it was ideology is a weapon as much as it is a way to understand and change the world around you. And so, like, the way that we even understand ourselves isn't always what it seems. And this is, where I'm going with this is like, looking, like, reaching back into the past and trying to like cling to bits and pieces of ideology that served the 18th and 19th century is just not going to cut it in a system like this.
Yeah.
The system will continue to evolve and adapt to changes. And what does that look like? Well, we already talked about how in the 1930s and then later in the post-war, how this system of this state, in a way, came to be, that you had the rise of these enormous bureaucratic institutions that kind of became not only moral guardians, but these are poles of stability to prevent things like economic depressions, and to continue to allow the United States to resist, a hegemonic power like the Soviet Union. And so, like, that's kind of how the system has evolved. Like, it is not a bunch of like Tidewater planters going around the neighborhood and then going to Congress and representing you. I mean, we are managed by many nameless, faceless people with authority within this enormous apparatus, that are essentially able to like legislate, from their positions. And
Yep.
so anyway, we can look at that, and some people on the right will see this as a massive conspiracy and an assault on liberty, and there's some truth to all of this. But at the end of the day, that's what we have, and we do have it for a reason. Might not be the best reason, but it is a reason. And what's going to come next? So we just talked about how, in Congress in many ways is very like symbolic rather than being like effective and being like the real holders of power in our country. So what comes after this, where already like it almost seems like Congress is obsolete? Um, if we're eventually moving from institutions and bureaucrats kind of being these enlightened bureaucrats being who manages this ship of state, it very well could become something like, where you integrate AI into that equation. Because already it's almost like the people are almost divorced from that. Like, what we're voting for is more like symbolic victories and things. We're not actually like,
Yeah.
we're not really influencing.
They're not exactly doing what we want when we get there. They're just doing
Yeah.
whatever the
And
letter
so, like,
letter
I
name
absolutely
says.
think that there's a possibility for this, especially in the world to come. I'm not really pleased about that. It's pretty scary to think about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think it's a possibility. I don't know what it would look like, but I mean, this thing is going to change. I mean, it's already like, all the formula is there. The strain we are seeing on the system is already there. People have no faith in these institutions. They don't like people like Fauci and these bureaucrats. They that we're dithering over here, as a lot of these institutions are lying and failing, and then we elect somebody like Trump, who's really like kind of a response to that. All this signals that there's a lot of systemic strain going on. There's a problem. It has to evolve, right? And so it's going to change. And I wonder sometimes if that's kind of what is going to get integrated into this equation. And people are going to be so fed up with all the chaos that they're going to be very pleased to just see something finally start working, to get some order in their lives. And yeah, like all things, like every time we've ever undergone a transformation, there's going to be good things and bad things. And I guess, unfortunately, that's going to be something our grandchildren are going to have to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. My goal though, is just, I'm a believer, and I'm not a, I mean, I'm a sinful, broken person like everybody else, but I do think that the key to retaining our humanity in this is to retain some kind of belief in God and the Almighty.
Oh, absolutely.
I think retaining that and holding fast to that is going to be the thing that keeps people from keep their head above water in the world to come. And yeah, so that's kind of where I am.
Yeah, I just maybe like the next crusade actually is not against another religion. It's actually against AI, and I'm all for it. So
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of funny because it's like I look at this kind of in like philosophical terms. It's like if there's anything that tells that informs me about whatever the left is, it just seems to be like a rejection or like a kind of like a hostility to just human nature, which is like really is always been a thorn in the side of like leftist utopians and stuff.
yeah.
And so it's like, I mean, I can't think of I can't think of a better answer to the problem of human nature than to try to render human beings obsolete and outsource everything to like some robot brain, that can.
That's communism. They'd love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, there's some horrors that are going to be attached. There's going to be some horrible things that come along with this tendency for
Yeah.
people to kind of want that. But at the same time, though, I've also heard a lot of compelling arguments that some of the weaknesses that are within AI and this desire for like super intelligence, there's going to be like a lot of problems that are could very well doom it from performing a function like that. And so that's kind of my hope, but I really don't know.
I mean, there has to be, right? Like, it can't just be something like, nope, it's too late. It's over.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, I refuse to believe in that because even like what this is one of the funnier things Joe Rogan was saying is like we're building these massive data centers and all these like servers to be able to house these supercomputers and this quantum computing and all this shit that's going to go into AI. And he's like, if it's really that much of a threat, why aren't we nuking them right now? Like,
right,
it's a good,
right,
it's a good
yeah,
question.
yeah. I don't know.
Let's
I
just
think
get it out of here so we don't even have to deal with it. Like, no, we're gonna blow this shit up off the planet now, and AI is never allowed back. But
right. Well,
well,
and I do think, I kind of look at this like, like I find the natural world to be pretty inspiring and interesting. And so like when you radically change an ecosystem, you'll start to see the behavior of the wildlife there radically change.
mhm.
And it can be kind of sad. Like there are parts of America that don't have any birds singing in them. And,
Yeah,
there are parts of the country that that used to have certain like megafauna. They're all gone now. And it all boils down to even like the idea of like there are certain animal species that when you put them in like a cage, they just kind of give up the will to live and they don't do very well. And I look at human beings and I'm watching like our birth rates plummet, and I'm watching there's all sorts of indicators that are the lights are flashing. And I'm like, a lot of these like sweeping radical changes that have been enacted just over the past 40 years appear to really be doing a number on the human subject that's involved in all this. And that's kind of like where I get a little bit worried is that, I don't know what AI is going to do, and who knows what role it will play within the next 5 to 10 years. But I do know one thing is something is going wrong because people are not doing this, or not, they're not doing the things that they've been doing for thousands of years. I mean,
yeah,
like, what's a more basic function than like starting a family and having offspring? I mean, that's like
yeah,
pretty ingrained, a
yeah.
primordial thing, and like that in and of itself. So, like, some of the dangers that I'm most concerned about are like some of those, I maybe the byproduct of this thing we're talking about, the kind of thing that would need AI or develop AI, right? And yeah, that's where it kind of returns back to that idea is like I just really hope people can retain their semblance of their humanity in this crazy world we live in.
Um, we're gonna switch completely into something different.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, but because I just want to get your take on this because it's gone on far longer than I think many of us would have thought. But I just saw, I think Trump said it was either yesterday or the day before, his phone call with President Putin about, we're trying to negotiate this ceasefire. And the quote that he said was that Putin doesn't know how to get out of this. Do you buy that?
I don't know. You know, I don't know. I haven't. I'll be honest. You're going to hate me for this. I've been taking such an enjoyable hiatus from the news that I don't
No,
want to
that's
get
even better. You don't have to.
much
Like
analysis.
that's just on. This is
But
more surface level thing because to
I
me, when I hear that quote, I think like Trump either is making it up or he got Putin to put on some semblance of humanity for a change, right? Like he got the
well, I
dude to
will.
like take off his Skeletor mask and be like, dude, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Like, help. Because that's what it
I
sounds
will.
like to me. Like he's like, I can't go to my people and be like, well, I don't know what the fuck to do. Like he's literally going to Trump, it sounds like. And it's like, dude, I'm fucked. I need some help. What do I do?
Well, I'll put it this way: is that in diplomacy, usually we'll have, um, and this is not like a value judgment on diplomats of any stripe. It's just how it is. You know, whether it's the president, whether it's diplomats, the way you communicate to an international audience or to your other world leaders and the way you communicate to your population has to be different. And sometimes the things that you say are going to be radically different. And
Mhm.
that makes get rubs people the wrong way. It's always an easy dunk on politicians that have, or like statesmen that have to do this. But that's just the nature of diplomacy, right?
Yeah.
Um, like we saw this during the tariff tensions with Mexico, as president of Mexico is like signaling things to the American people, right, or to Trump, that it's very different than things she's signaling to her own population. Okay,
Right.
and so this is kind of like it's a lot of smoke and mirrors with diplomacy. I don't know what to make of what's going on over there. Like ultimately, like I think it's a tragedy that Ukraine is in the situation it's in. I know there's a lot of blame to go around on why that is that way, and I don't need to go into that. But you know, I'm not big like Russia stan or anything. I also don't hate Russia and think they're the worst country in the world. But you know, this is going to be a very difficult. This is going to be a very difficult problem to solve. But I think that I think Donald Trump, like I said at the beginning, he's kind of a pragmatist, and he seems to
Yeah.
practice realpolitik, and he
Yep.
also seems to understand that he communicates. Um, he doesn't communicate literally, and I think that's actually can be an asset on the international stage. Now, that's not something you're going to read in from the uh, the scholars and the news and stuff, but
Yeah.
like I do
Foreignpolicy.com.
yeah, I do think there's a power to that, and it might work pretty well with a guy like Putin. So, you know, we'll have to see. But I kind of anything that people say on the international stage of any, whether it's Americans or otherwise, I just kind of take it all with a grain of salt. You know, I always figure there's like something buried in there. The truth is buried in there, but I'm not going to get it from just these oblique statements.
Yeah, and I know you said you've been kind of taking a break, but like the whole Mideast trip he just did, like I've never seen an American president, regardless of the party, have the success and kind of the like reverence that was shown to him. Like, definitely
Mm-hmm.
didn't happen during Bush. Definitely didn't happen during Obama. I don't even know if Biden made an appearance in the Middle East. I mean, but even then, it's just like, but watching like his reception, the way he was treated, the financial investments he was able to secure, like. I haven't heard it. I generally didn't hear anything negative about any of it, other than these people. Some people are still like, "Oh my God, he's accepting a jet from Qatar." It's like, okay, wow. I know. I guess maybe we should return the Statue of Liberty to Paris. I don't know, but it's like, come on.
You know, the thing that's I like about him, especially in terms of the Middle East, is that you know there are like there are just countless organizations and individuals that are supposedly experts on the Middle East
Yeah,
and are consulted and they write papers and they go in and like kind of like they kind of take us they walk into Congress and they kind of give these guys, because most of Congress is pretty slow, kind of gives them the right talking points and like kind of the thing, they're able to paint the picture for these half wits and stuff. And like so that they kind of have a run of the town. Like Washington D.C. is full of these types, and I can just imagine they were screaming at Trump when he pulled off the Abraham Accords in the beginning, and
yep.
they're upset. Some of them are upset now, and the point is like there's a lot of foreign policy gurus who have had, their pick of great assignments and trying to fix things and make the Middle East a better place, all this stuff, and like, serve our interests. And at the end of the day, like this guy knows how to go into a place and through his and the people around him, through their own personality and will, are able to accomplish so much more than, hundreds of thousands of experts. And so, like, there is something interesting about that. It's something I like about his approach to foreign policy. Is he seems to understand how to communicate with other world leaders that are like this, and it plays very well in the Middle East. I mean, one of the things he did in his first term is like he kind of like let Jared Kushner
Yep.
go around and like kick it with world leaders and like develop rapport, and they were able to like get things done and work on stuff and have conversations that army of State Department diplomats and civil servants can pull off in a lifetime.
And everybody hated that because it's like, who the fuck is Jared Kushner? Why does he like? What are his qualifications? Like, I don't know. You don't really need a fucking diplomatic background to be able to just build relationships and talk to people. It's a skill you either have or you don't.
Right. And, it kind of goes back to this. People are, going back to these classical liberals are talking about loving and believing in the Constitution and all this stuff. The thing is like Article 2 powers are pretty broad, and those are the powers for the president. He has a lot of latitude, and this president seems like he understands that and wants to flex that.
He definitely spent 4 years figuring that out.
Yeah. At the end of the day, Trump understands, I think, that all of these little departments full of all their eggheads and experts and, whatever, that they answer to the president, and that he has the power to shape U.S. foreign policy, and that is a big responsibility. But I think he takes it very seriously, and the fact that he's able to engage in the Middle East the way he does, and that nobody has this guy in his pocket. He's his own guy, like, and we know that. Mm-hmm. And sometimes some people might like it, other times it might not work out the way they like it. But the point is he practices pragmatic politics, and it's very much based on personality, and there's a lot you can do with that. And so I'm happy to see this. I would, I don't have like a hot take on every part of the Middle East. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with we have an ascendant Turkey being able to really shape the region and other parts of the world now that, the game board has kind of changed. It was interesting to see him Trump go in and, talk to Giuliani. Interesting. And there's some other things going on. I don't have a hot take on all of it, but I think the United States, like, we're already in a transformative moment, and I'm glad that we have a president who can be nimble enough to want to go over there and actually like talk to people rather than do like PR stunts. And, and this is the thing, he gets accused of this, but that's not what is happening behind the scenes. I mean, I don't see that.
It's totally
not PR stunts. They're not like, we're sending over our team of like experts and stuff to go over and like, do like a goodwill tour or whatever. Donald Trump's going in there and having hard conversations. And I'm just glad we're in his hands for this. A big issue for me has been, I've been very, I'm kind of an anti-interventionist now. And I like that Donald Trump seems to actually understand that, like, all of these wars and conflicts that we've been going haven't really served the American people very well.
I'm 100%. I'm with you. And that's why I'm actually curious about that, because I feel like, probably just speaking to the microphone, I feel like that it's kind of reflective of just our generation in general, right? Because we all just went through this whole global war on terror era, which is thankfully over. Obviously didn't end well, and I just saw that memo that Secretary Hegseth is going to launch an investigation into the withdrawal, which I'm happy to see, because I think this country needs to realize just how fucking embarrassing it was, not just what they saw on TV, but everything that led up to it.
Right.
But also, I think all of us who like, and that's what I've said to some people. I've said this to my parents. I've said this to some friends. Also, like, it's like you see people like Joe Kent getting into the counterintelligence thing. Like, you see our peers, bro. Our peers, people that you and I served with or served adjacent to. We're now there, right? And we're going into these situations with that experience, not just like, oh, I came from this university and it's my time. Like, no, it's actually, we came from the University of Real World Experience and we're going to apply it this time. And we're not going to get our soldiers committed to stupid fucking shit for the sake of stupid fucking shit. Right. So this is when I go back to me talking, like, this is why I say, like, you say things way more elegantly to me, because now I'm at the point where I'm just going to be bluntly honest and say, like, we're not doing the dumb shit anymore. Like, if
Right.
it's not in America, if it's not something that's generally going to benefit the United States of America, then why would we do it? And that's where I was going with this next question, is because we've seen this with, in my opinion, the one guy, and I know a lot of people are starting to say the same thing, but like, I've always loved Marco Rubio. I told you, I've spent most of my life in Florida. I loved him as soon as he came on the scene in the state legislature in 2006 or 8, I think it was. And then he became obviously a Tea Party star, rose up, and I've made the contention that he's probably the only one left from the Tea Party generation who hasn't decided to make their entire career about themselves, like Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, like guys who've literally done fucking nothing but grandstand for the entire time they've been in the Senate. Rubio has managed to leverage himself into, my opinion, probably the most valuable guy in the administration right now for Trump, to the point where he's like dual hatting. He's doing all kinds of shit. And he's been so like he's literally become the most effective member of his, you know, JD Vance aside, but like he's the most effective member of his cabinet. And he's just thriving on the world stage right now. Even today, like when he was called in front of him and he's just schooling Tim Kaine, that fucking retard from our state. But anyway, like seeing Rubio's like ascension to where he's at now, I'm just curious, like what your take is on him. Like, what do you think like that dude's future is once Trump decides to obviously, well, unless he runs for the third term, which he can't, but whatever. It's Trump. He's gonna do what he wants to do. Yeah. So where do you come out on Rubio and how he's kind of established himself in the State Department?
Yeah, I've really liked it. I mean, I think it shows that he's, he and JD Vance seem to be people that actually read stuff. Like I don't know what they're
Imagine that.
talking about. Yeah, they're not just there to like ape the behaviors of like influential, educated people. Like they actually read stuff. They actually think about this. Yeah, he's been very decisive. I think I loved that when the State Department put out kind of like they put out this bulleted list about policies coming out of state, like, will this is this in the interest of the country? Is this in the interest of the American people? Like, how does this, for lack of better words, like how does this make their lives better? Having this has been the perennial complaint from Americans, is that they don't feel that their country's foreign policy uh, enhances their well-being almost ever. And now you have a who's somebody in the State Department, and I'm sure he's an ambitious guy. He's but he's the point is that's not a problem necessarily. Like he's ambitious with the agenda. He seems to be very loyal to the president, which is great. You need that. But I don't get the sense, like other secretaries of state, that he's just there to cool his heels until he moves on to a higher office, like maybe runs or something. Like he seems to be fully owning this position. He's been executing the president's agenda very well. He's been able to lion tame difficult personalities while still, fighting some of these battles very effectively against the enemies of the administration. I'm really enjoying it. I think that he's an excellent choice. I didn't know what to think. I didn't have a very strong opinion on Rubio before this term, and watching him in this position, I mean, it's good. I mean, I've really been pretty impressed with how effective he's been. And so, yeah, I think this guy is going to go places. I think him and JD Vance are probably some of the most capable individuals we've seen. You take away your politics or other things. I mean, those two guys are formidable. There's no doubt about it. And so, like, they're going to be doing something great in this country years to come.
But that's the thing. Like you bring it up, and this is what's missing. Like there's tons of personality on the left. There's no substance. And right now, I won't get like I don't think Rubio's always had the substance. Like I said, I've watched the guy's entire career for 20 years. He's struggled with the personality aspect that sometimes, especially you go back to the 2016 where he tried to bait Trump into the whole fucking hands thing, and he kind of ruined his own campaign in Miami, his hometown, like at that last little debate. But I think he's grown from that, and he's kind of realized he's he's matured into an actual statesman and a politician, but also one who's still effective as a communicator because he's very smart. Like he has substance. And then we already know Vance, right? Everyone knows like where he's came from and where he's at right now, and he's that dude's only ascending as well. Like we've got men on this side who are not only capable of having the personality, right? We like to call it the cult of personality. It's a cool term, but like that's Trump. Trump's the cult of personality. He's not articulate. Like you've made this case already tonight. He talks differently. He talks like you harken back to a different era. Whereas Vance, he can articulate what Trump's policy means. Rubio can do the same thing. Like you want to have a policy discussion, these two gentlemen can actually sit down there and do this with you for however long you want to do. I don't see any of that on the left right now as they're currently constructed. We
Right.
already know Harris couldn't do it. Like, and when you and people need to step back a second and be like, well, she still got 74 million votes. It's like, no, she didn't. The fucking party she ran for got 74 million votes. Like, there's a reason she didn't win. Okay. When we get to that final stage and it's election day, it's an R versus a D, period. Okay. But leading up to that, she didn't make that case to be that person. We saw what actually happened in 2020 when she decided to take on that role, right? She got fucking destroyed by everybody that actually could articulate real policy. Tulsi Gabbard murdered her on live TV. And then the guy they actually chose to run never got higher than fourth, but whatever. Let's pretend that 2020 never happened. But that's what's missing right now, in my opinion, on the left. Like, there's tons of personality. You got AOC. You still got Bernie Sanders in his fucking 90s out there doing his oh the oligarchy, and I'm not going to sit there and fly with United. What do I look like? Like the dude's a walking hip. Like the fact that just he literally said it. Like he said the meme, right? He said it. Like I'm not going to hang out with you fucking peasants. But other than that, who's this other name that's making her name out there? Who's another fucking embarrassment? Jasmine Crockett, another one. Someone who's decided to mock her entire existence and become an actual like fucking caricature of what a black female in America is. Like you watch everything that woman said up until the time she was a prosecutor to the now that she's elected as a congresswoman. Now she wants to play the fucking illiterate ghetto card. Give me a fucking break. I'm sorry. Like, I can't stand to watch inauthenticity because they feel like that's what's going to play to their voters. That
Right.
makes no sense. That woman's background, her parents, the schools she went to, I'm sorry. You don't get to play the fucking Cardi B. That's not
Well,
who you are.
and like the
It's
thing,
not real. There's no authenticity.
well, and I think you hit the nail on the head is that the one of the things that gives Trump so much power, and you brought up there's a difference, like the JD Vances and the Rubios know how to fight those battles with a certain type of person,
Yep.
and then also fight those battles in the before an audience of people that type of wrangling, like that matters to them, right? It matters that like these exchanges we see in Congress, like that, and that's not a bad thing. It's just there's certain people that really resonates with them. Having like heated debates in the halls of Congress, or
Mhm.
having somebody debate the points of a study. There's a type of American, there's a type of person. It's a class thing partially too that carries a lot of weight. But Trump knows how to he knows how to defy those people at the same time knows how to communicate very effectively
Yep.
with ordinary people. And he really the power he has is that authenticity. He's very authentic. And here's the thing is I think in the beginning, everyone thought that you could throw a lot of mud at him and that he would, like every other Republican or every other, politician, that it would never be able to come off. Trump embraced the mud. He like embraced it.
Exactly.
Said,
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
what you want about
Yeah.
me. Yep, I got skeletons in the closet.
Yep.
Not a big deal. I'm running for president. He was not like that's the thing is Trump was able to overcome the powerful media and social media mob dynamic that has always crippled Republican candidates. He walked right through that unscathed. And
Yep.
so that was kind of like a refiner, not a refiner's fire. It was kind of like a test, and he
Yep.
passed that with flying colors. A lot of politicians cannot. So where I'm going with this is That authenticity piece is very strong. Pairing that with the ability to overcome the slings and arrows that come from social media and journalists that are hostile, if you can get those two together, you're going to be successful. I think that we're going to continue to see this trend change politics. The kind of people that were successful 35, 40 years ago are not going to fly nowadays. Now, Jasmine Crockett or AOC might be like maybe on the left, might be like a type of politician that we don't really like, but there's something that they have that kind of has these two qualities. Like Jasmine Crockett doesn't mind dropping F-bombs on the floor, you know.
Also a niche, though. I would just push back. I would say it's a
It is.
niche. Like that's not that
It
doesn't.
is.
You
Kind
know
of
what I
look
mean?
past the appeal, more like what could damage her. She can clearly can say all sorts of things that will not get her thrown out of Congress by her voters, right?
Yeah.
There's something there. And that, and I don't really like how this is going, but like we have seen this very successful on the other side with Trump, right? Like he has an
No, that's true.
authenticity I
That's
don't
fair.
think
That's a fair
another,
point.
but they can mimic authenticity. AOC and Jasmine Crockett can at least pretend to be authentic effectively. But the big thing is they don't just go down with some media hostility or social
Yeah.
media campaign against them. And
Well,
you can't say that about a lot of other members of Congress who it would just take a banana peel on the racetrack and they're done.
well, and that's the other thing. I think I know we've said this probably in our chats, but I mean, I've said this with tons of other people. Like people forget that like we don't know who 95% of Congress is.
Right.
We know these names because they've made themselves into names, but I mean, if you and I were honest, maybe you can probably do more than me, but I'll probably give you 16, maybe 17 Congress members,
Mm-hmm.
probably the same senators.
Right.
But I mean, I'm missing damn near 500,
Right.
right?
Well,
So,
and yeah, I mean that kind of speaks to the fact that if these people really had the power that we kind of believe
yeah,
they do, I mean they do have power, but it's not the power. It's
yeah,
not the power within. It's not they're not the ghost in the machine thing. It's like they are. I would say they're more symbolic than almost these are like theatrical representations of this operating system that we call government, but they're not maybe like they're like the PR people of this machine, but they don't necessarily drive the bus. And so yeah, I don't know. I wonder where we're going to go from here. I do think that like JD Vance seems to have like really embraced this role very well, where he's able to like get down and fight and scrap in a way
yeah,
like with journalists that plays very well to people, because I think people are just fed up with journalists. So even drawing like a little blood during an interview is like everybody, it doesn't hurt you.
yeah.
Whereas like in the
Frankly,
19th,
I don't care, Margaret.
yeah, I mean, there's a beautiful line.
It's-
And like, this wasn't always like this. Like there was a
no, it
time
wasn't.
Richard Nixon was able, like he kind of went on the offensive. Him and Spiro Agnew like really
Yeah,
kind of took it to the journalists. And there were times, Agnew especially, like they'd be like, you're going a little too far with these journalists. You're going to poison the electorate against you. And like
that
now,
was just a
people
very
go
different time, though, right? Because that was when all people they consumed everything through that.
right. No, that's exactly right.
Yeah,
It's because you have this post Cold War information regime, or you have Cold War information regime, where you basically, I mean, and think about this: if you're going to win the Cold War, you can't have something like Twitter functioning that's going to have a whole bunch of people dividing over all sorts of silly things like
yeah,
what you eat for breakfast, which is like what it is today, right? You need to have everybody locked step and mobilized. I mean, you just come off of war. The whole population had to get mobilized to win a war. Now you've got a Cold War. You got to mobilize the masses to be on the program. You can't have too far of right and left limits.
yeah.
And so on that, we're kind of living in the shadow of that. And I think a lot of these journalists don't realize like their time's up, like it's over.
Oh yeah,
You know,
100%.
that's why almost all of the stuff that you read in the news these days sounds like a gossip column from like, a high school paper. And that these
Yeah.
people are like resorting to the like trying to dodge
Everything's an unknown source, unnamed source. Like nothing's fucking.
yeah, and I mean
Just
they're not even like they don't even talk about politicians or elected officials. I mean they're going after like soccer moms and like bus
yeah,
drivers for
God.
using naughty words or stuff. It's just pathetic. But that's kind of like that's the remnants of this information regime. It's really declined.
I do worry about that though because I wanted to like so we do still have we do still live in a dangerous world where people realize it or not. And we do still have very real adversaries. I argue, and I know you said it earlier, like you don't hate, you don't love Russia, but um, I really think like if we were going to make some legitimate allies against what we argue is our number one military and economic adversary, China, we need to take Russia away from them because they've
Yeah,
already made their alignments with BRICS.
right,
Um,
right. That was a
that is,
big
I am
problem.
curious. Yeah, I'm just curious. Like, what do you could we ever actually mobilize our country against one individual entity again, or we can just because of social media, the internet, or whatever, we're just doomed to be constantly partisan. But
That's a great question. I mean, if you consult history, and I mean, we do live in a weird time, but
yeah,
I will say, like, I think if people want to really probe this question and try to kind of speculate, it's a good to look at World War One. Not because it's not because like if we had to mobilize, it would be exactly the same, but to understand the kind of effect that a state going to war can have on the population. It's a very real thing, and that I would argue that our entry into World War One and what it took to fight that war, that legacy is stuck with us to this day, and I think that you can mobilize a population, but what it's going to take to get this pop, and they will do it. I mean, this is the thing: is if it came down to it, they would. But it kind of scares me to think what it would take, because what tends to happen in America is we have the luxury of having two big oceans on both sides. We feel like we
which
can
I
just
love. I just wish we leaned into it more, but that's me.
yeah, I mean, I like to do, but the kind of the challenge is that we kind of go in this weird schizophrenic like turn between um, wanting to kind of just focus inward and then focusing ultimately outward, and we have kind of like, I mean, Kissinger said it was kind of like this missionary zeal and this I can't remember the one he might have used, isolationist, but it's like we kind of have like this missionary zeal, and then we have like this hyper focus on the inside. And what that looks like when you're mobilizing a population is you tend to like you caricature and vilify whatever belligerent power you're going against, which is kind of natural. That's what most nations do. But then what you also do is that you almost have to like find internal enemies and you blow those up. I mean, we really, I mean, we saw this recently with
Yeah,
all these allegations that like all these conservatives are Putin's puppets and stuff, and
yeah.
like
Everybody's Putin's puppet. Like, oh my God,
really,
Russian dossier. Oh,
yeah, I mean, like, and
it's
that's
not even
kind of
real.
right, and that's kind of how you kickstart things into driving, like getting mobilizing people and kind of radicalizing them, and like that's the real devil in the details. Is everybody likes to pretend that like all of these. This has always been a hobby horse of mine because it just I feel like it's so egregious, but it's like everybody likes to go, oh, there's this fifth column out in the heartland, and I mean they did this during World War One, World War Two, and almost every conflict afterwards. It was just like, we have this fifth columnist group in the heartland or inside of such and such, and they're the internal enemies abetting our enemies, external enemies, and you vilify them, you play up a lot of propaganda, and you really kind of turn up the temperature, and that's how you kind of get people, lethargic Americans, to like get up and do stuff. That's how you get, during Trump's first term, that's how you get a bunch of these like, in any other circumstance, a very nice, uh, benign, like old, grandma who happens just to be a Democrat to be like calling for the blood of like
Yeah.
MAGA Republicans, and I mean we watch that to great effect. And now I think people on the left would argue that's happening with immigration right now. I don't agree with that, but at the end of the day, this is kind of how you solve problems in America, and it can get kind of dicey. So it scares me, man. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like I don't like that. It's an incredibly intense situation. I really hated it during the last administration when, Joe Biden's like ranting about, these like soccer moms like being like Al Qaeda or like being like Nazis or whatever. It's like that kind of stuff is just really poisonous. But that's how you mobilize a population. So if we have to go toe to toe with China, there's going to be a lot of crazy antics going on with the within the American electorate to get them to care. And that's kind
Yeah. I mean, I'm so some of that just really it doesn't make me very confident. And I know we're having great times again with recruiting. Um, but like this, like, dude, could you imagine if we had to have a draft?
yeah.
Like,
I don't,
seriously.
I
Like
think a
it's
draft would probably break us. And I don't think, I
well,
think that,
because like we don't I mean I talked about this with Viking Rob when he was on. I think China's got like 20 million people in their military.
yeah, I mean, that's nothing
Okay.
to that,
And
right?
and I get it. Like we always come back to the old Napoleon line, right? Like wars are won with logistics, and I got it. And we used to be pretty good at that, but I'm sorry. We can't get to China right now. Like we
Yeah,
literally we can't. We what with what ships? Like we can
right.
fly over there, but then what? What do we do now? Where's our equipment? Where's that coming from? Like so that's why like I go back to what we just said. Like I'd love to lean into the ocean thing. Like yeah, I don't want to see my country like destroyed through war again, like it's the Civil War. But I'm also like we got some home team advantages here.
Right. Well, no, for sure. The problem is that we live in a day and age when like oceans are like highways, you know.
Yeah.
We aren't as isolated as we've been in the past. Now, there are some things that like we are always going to be blessed with probably the best foreign policy position in the world, but that comes with its own, pros and cons, right? And I think one of the things is I don't think the America would ever like, at least in my lifetime, it could change, but for the foreseeable future, I think that the fear in Washington is ever having to implement a draft. I think the way that the Washingtonian perspective is that that is highly dangerous for the stability of the country, and that might break Washington. And it
Well,
because it arguably it really scarred the nation, and it really weakened the institutions to a point that I think that they were really worried about where that was going to go. There's a reason why. I mean, it wasn't just because he was like a sappy liberal that Carter was like, we're going to pardon a lot of these draft dodgers and stuff. Like there's a political problem there that could become really difficult to overcome if you impose a draft. Now, here's the question though: if you go toe to toe with a powerful nation, which we haven't seen that since the 40s, what are you going to do? Because we're not just fighting in the jungles of Vietnam now. We're dealing with the near peer, and you
yeah.
have to have. I
And
don't care what
we
anybody
we
says. You
we've
have to have
shifted.
bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
you
we've
have
shifted like our entire focus is back to the whole LISCO environment, right? Large scale combat operations. So I'm sorry,
right.
but what does that take? That takes a
Yeah.
lot more than a 2 million
Well,
force.
especially when you have a large. I mean, we're a country with a big population. I mean, we're not might not be India or China, but we have a big population,
Yeah.
and
Well, how do you feel that ranks then?
and that's the thing. And that honestly has been like my biggest complaint. I don't understand. I mean, I have many bones to pick with the left, but like one of the things that kills me about a lot of these Democratic politicians is, I mean, they're eviscerating. I mean, the Republicans are not great, I know, but the problem is though there is a concerted effort, whether it's intentional or not, and I tend to think it kind of is more intentional than it ought to be, um, to essentially redefine citizenship. And when you redefine citizenship to the point where you lose any sense of civic mindedness of your, I mean, like look at all the things that you see that really like a liberal, like your liberal professions, that these have like that they have a purview over education. You look at like even within like the high ranking in the military. I mean, so many of these people, as we saw with Trump's first term, so many of these high ranking officials were very like were absolutely like embraced the Biden administration when it came in, like the program, all that. The thing is like at the end, and like embraced all of those changes to the military that I think were really bad. Okay, take those like liberalized professions, and I mean each one of them that has any control where it relies on people of good character demonstrating some civic virtue. I mean, they just trash it. I mean, our education system in many places is is a train wreck. I mean, apart from like going to certain cities where the majority of your children are illiterate when they graduate from high school. I mean, and then take that all the way over to like how like service is, if that's even emphasized in our curriculum in schools, and whether like the country gets denigrated in our schools, and like these things have huge impacts. How do you get a population of people raised that way, that have been very neglected or exploited by these institutions. How do you get this population to fight for you? That's a really tough question, and that's why it kind of killed me watching Democrats like stand on the flag and be like, or wave the flag and try to like claim the mantle of being like uber patriots during Biden's administration. Because I was like, man, I just look at the military, I just look at the school system, I look at all the places that you tend to have the most influence, and the civic virtue, that ethos is just dead. And I don't know how does a nation like ours, that you're not like some blood and soil, European country where people are like, I am English because I live in England, I'm English, my ancestors have been here for 1,000 years or whatever. I mean, we're Americans. We've gone through many times of having lots and different people from different parts come in and assimilate and all this. How do you get a nation that is so diverse and divided like ours? How do you get people to fight for your country if they don't have a common sense of citizenship? Like, these are important considerations, because at the end of the day, you're not going to motivate a bunch of people that think their country is evil to go fight and die for it. Right. I mean, I'm sorry. It sounds simple. That's why it used to kill me when we can't be on Mill Twitter anymore. They'd sit around and talk about how providing better housing is going to, help us win wars. I think housing matters. I think you should take care of your soldiers. That's a given, but that's not the answer. That's giving better benefits is not the answer to.
No.
The truth is, you should cultivate the ethos that our grandfathers had going into the Second World War, that our fathers had going into Vietnam. I mean, that matters, and it's been so trashed and denigrated. I'm rambling, but I will say,
you're right.
I am happy though that Pete Hegseth is in. He's been getting a lot of heat, I know, from different angles, but I think
you're over the target.
He's a soldier, and he gets this. Like, he understands this. The guys who go out and do the heavy lifting are the people that, at the very end of the day, they might have many reasons for joining, but they feel a sense of loyalty to this country and to the people back home. And they know that that's where the buck stops, is with them. They're the backbone. Those are the types of people who have always won our wars for us, who have always protected the homeland. And I don't want to see those guys and gals or whatever, I don't want to see them get left by the wayside and mistreated. And I think Pete Hegseth gets that. So I am glad he's in there. I think if anybody's going to fix this, it's going to be that guy. But yeah, you have to have, I'm sorry, maybe in the early days of the Republic, you could function a different way. You have got to have a very strong sense of citizenship in the country today to win any war. And we don't have that. And that worries me.
Well, I think the one thing you're going to have to do is, because the draft's inevitable. Like, you can't, what are you going to do? Incentivize everybody with some fucking enlistment money, like a bonus? Like, you can't.
Yeah. Right? I don't know.
I'm going to give you here's the hard proposal. Like, this is what this has to be one of the options on the table or the desk of whoever's going to make this decision. Number one, you voluntarily conscript every illegal alien that you can find in the country right now, with the promise that once it's over, you survive, you're a citizen.
Right.
100%. On top of that, you have to conscript everyone. And, usually I would say it's the opposite. I would say if you're not in college. Now I'm going to say we need to set up, we're going to have some sort of percentage of college enrolled students have to join the military. Have to. Mm-hmm. And then you take the other percentage, what's left over, of those who are not actively in college, pursuing a higher education or whatever, or pursuing a trade, because I know we're getting to that point where we're actually doing the right thing and starting to pursue trades again. But I'm sorry, you can't have a country of 330 million people with a military of little more than, I think it's probably we're right around 2.2 million with reserves, and go and actually think you're going to have a winning chance against China, because you're in a war of attrition at that point. Yeah, we got great technology, but like I just told you, we can't get there. Are we waiting for them to come here? If we're going to fight the home team thing, then that changes variables on a lot of scales. But if we're not, if we're going to go be the visiting team again, then I'm sorry. That's going to take some really painful decisions and some painful sacrifice. And you're going to have to realize that, hey, there's actually a cost of living in this country. And it's not just a fucking freeload off of everyone who came before you.
Right. Right. I mean, they're going to have, and that's the thing, it's gonna to get to that place, and who knows, maybe somebody can pull it off, but it's gonna be a lot of pain along the way to get
No, I
that.
agree. And I honestly like, bro, I'll be honest, I don't want an 18-year-old.
Yeah.
I'm just being like, like, oh shit, where'd he go? There you are. I hit the thing on the screen. I was like, oh shit, Zoom left. I want 22 to 26. Why? Emotional maturity, physical maturity, and also some sort of intellectual maturity. That's what I want. Like that's the like I know we get into the military age of 18 to 34, but no, the sweet spot is 22 to 26. That's what I want. And where are those people consolidated at? Mostly in universities or just post to them. So, like, I'm sorry if we ever get to that point. Yeah, it's gonna suck. And you and I would probably be the first to volunteer, but we've kind of aged out of that, man. But I'm still
Yeah.
ready. Like I said,
You're
I'm gonna
more
fight
ready than
back.
me. You're in pretty good shape, I would
Yeah,
say that. But I
I'll
would
fight
say
back for
that.
shit against AI, but I mean, I can lead, but I'm not like my best days are behind me.
Well, and I think that that's going to be, I don't know. I really don't know where we go from here, because I do think that we don't even have a shared vision of, like, we don't even have a
You're
shared
right. You're right
understanding of
about that.
what the nation is. And, you just see that in the last administration, and the flag waving rhetoric of
Yeah.
that compared to our flag waving rhetoric over here. It couldn't be more different. And that's worrisome to me. I don't know how that gets fixed. I think it only gets fixed through crisis, like a severe enough crisis that a lot of this stuff drops away. And I hope it, I mean, but that's sadly enough, that is how it has always been for us.
Yeah, I mean that was us in 9/11, right? Like that brought
That
everybody
was us in
together for a very
9/11.
temporary time, but it worked.
That was us during a lot of different conflicts. You go to even World War II, FDR's war mobilization is highly controversial. A lot of people don't want that. The minute, Japan crushes our Navy over at Pearl Harbor, even like the most isolationist Americans are like signing up. And I do think that a lot of these people in Washington, I don't think they think about much of this, sadly, but I also think if they do, they're just hoping for a moment like that, you know. So I don't know. We'll see what happens, but yeah, it's worrisome. I mean, I know for me and my children, is I try to teach them that, there are imperfect things about our government. There are parts of our history as a country that, you have to do a little extra explaining. But at the end of the day, like, this land and this country is yours, and you should take good care of it and be a steward and be responsible for your friends and neighbors, and you should be patriotic. And I do believe that, and that's not always popular on my
No.
corner, but I do believe that. I mean, at the end of the day, like, my ancestors came here for a reason. They came here back in like the 1600s. Most of them, or many of them, I guess, I don't know, but they came quite early. And the point is that at the end of the day, like, I was born at this moment for a reason, and I would be, I'd be damned if I'm gonna just like toss that away.
Yeah.
And America is every bit of mine as it is somebody up in Washington. My ancestors, made sure that I would be able to inherit some amount of freedom and living here, and I take that very seriously. And I think a lot of Americans do still. Unfortunately, I think that we have a major divide on what America is and where it should go from here. But hopefully we'll see this kind of get smoothed out. I have a lot of, I mean, as negative as I've sounded today,
I
actually,
don't think you're negative at all. I think
but
you're pragmatic. Exactly. It's a big word of the day, but
yeah,
I think that's
but
where you're at.
I'm very pleased to have old Donald Trump in office. I'm very pleased with that. I like a lot of the people that I see at the top doing, working hard and changing things. Not everything's going to be a cakewalk. Not everything's going to be easy. And like I said, politics, you don't always get what you want.
Yep.
But man, the last 4 years were so dang bad that, I mean, this feels like just a breath of fresh air to me. I mean, I couldn't be happier with the difference. And I mean, we'll still have challenges, but man, like I said, so many of these things, and we have to remember, like, so many of the things that I was so frustrated with the last 4 years, at least I can say, like, military example is, man, aren't I happy that we have somebody running the show with the DoD who understands what ordinary soldiers have been dealing with, and who cares about
100%.
that sense of like pride and that sense of like that ethos that we know is so important. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, the guy goes in, like, man, when I saw Pete running around working out with teams and doing. Man, I was like, that's my guy.
Yeah.
I was so happy to see that.
Yeah. Real quick, I go back to when I was out at Fort Harrison, and I'm Catholic, so I found the first, obviously Catholic, and apparently there's a lot of Catholicism out there in Helena. There's a Carroll Colleges out there, and the St. Helena Cathedral, which is beautiful. But I remember going to mass and coming out, and there's this mural, not a mural, but it's a little, I guess it is a mural. It's not a monument, it's a mural. It's on the wall anyway inside, like when you walk in, but it's from World War One, and it's all the names of soldiers who died in service during World War One from this parish. And dude, there were so many sets of brothers, three brothers, a few sets of four brothers, all from the Helena in World War One. And I thought to myself, like, how the hell did they even get that call to come serve? All the way out in Montana. Like, this is Helena, Montana, right? Like, and that goes back to the disconnect that's always been from DC to, like, you go read about the Empire of the Silver Moon, right? You're talking about all that the war and everything, like everything that went on in Texas, and all these things that, like, Washington's always had this disconnect with. How the hell did you get multiple sets of brothers to respond and go take that call to go fight and die in World War One? Like, that's what's nuts to me. Like, there's been so much sacrifice in this country, and I know you've already hit on it. You talked about, like, our grandfathers and our fathers and all, but, like, somewhere along the line, and I don't know if it's just because of the indoctrination that's going on in the education system, but we've allowed that lack of pride, that lack of like commitment to this country. We've allowed that to happen. Like, we have to be honest about it.
Yeah. I
Like,
mean,
it's not just be like, oh, you know what? I'm grandson and my grandfather was this, and I'm like, fuck that guy. No, it's somehow we've allowed the worst actors to permeate and get into our education system, to, like what you said, to now you hate your country, you hate where you're at because you've been taught your founding is some sort of evil fucking thing when it's not. And so now we're in this really complex dilemma of, like, who's going to come and fight for this country next.
yeah. I mean, and that's kind of like the failure of. I mean, and it's a tough. It's a real. To be honest with you, this is like a century long problem. Um, I mean, you really see like the. I will just put it this way: after much study, and this is my take on it, so could be wrong, but um, I don't like when people talk about principles and stuff. It's great. Like, I've kind of made fun of this a little bit today, but it's great and whatever. But, like, that's not really how politics works. And the ideologies that kind of that pervade the two sides, right? And they kind of intersect sometimes, but these are evolving things. And one of the things I think conservatives need to realize is that liberalism is a ideology of power within institutions. It is adapted to be this way. And if you look at conservatism, it is almost the opposite. And that comes with all sorts of problems and some good things too. But I don't think people understand that the way that these ideologies function are, it's not that people just believed things that were harmful and that they indoctrinated other people alone. I mean, obviously, there's an element of that within schools and stuff, but that even the actors themselves are kind of carried on. Ideologies kind of have their way with you. You don't really control them as much as you think. And this ideology of power has been very much within our institutions. And this is kind of like liberalism. People like to draw this line to the founding fathers and be like, "Oh yeah, well, all we have to do is just return to the beliefs they had." But, like, they don't take into account how much, if you even want to try to, like, trace them, how much these things have transformed and evolved according to the conditions they live in. There's a reason why we have this regime I talked about that came about from the New Deal and strengthened during the Cold War, and who staffed those positions, who became teachers and who became bureaucrats and who moved the ship of state. It's the ideology of liberalism has really much animated that whole thing. And so in a way, it's almost inevitable that within institutions of this nature that you get people with this ideology that over time has changed. The liberalism of the 1920s is not the same as the liberalism today.
Yep.
And it and same with the opposite, which has become, we call it conservatism. But I mean, this is kind of how you have the better way to look at it is the ideology of acting upon others and the ideology of being acted upon, and those are your two dynamics.
Yep.
So if you're in a position of influence, there is a very good chance that you will be adopting in some form or fashion the ideology of acting upon others. It's what informs how you understand the world around you, and that ideology has become very decrepit and degraded over time. And frankly, I would say that I hate saying this, but like conservatives and liberals in many respects resemble, if they had jumped into the 1940s and had a conversation with someone, there's a good chance that your average person would be perceived as being slightly a pinko communist, even a conservative of nowadays. And I don't say that to be like, flippant or anything, but the point is that ideologies have changed and some have become very powerful on both sides of this. And we have to understand how these things change over time. The only way to really understand the world that we live in is to see that these things change. They don't stay permanent. That's why, like, going around and cultivating a beautiful principle that you've plucked from the 17th century is not really that. It's not very effective. It doesn't really do anything, but it does make people think you're smart and virtuous. But it doesn't. It does not explain the world around you.
I
And
know Locke. I know Smith. I know all these cool.
right, and yeah, trying to and praising Locke and Smith is wonderful, whatever, but it will not solve the problems today. That act, and that's kind of like the danger that I think a lot of people on the right or even in the middle run into, is they think if you go and you read the founding fathers that it's almost like a sense of moral instruction rather than how do we solve political problems today? Why are things the way they are? I think that's the more important question. But well, sorry, man. I know I've taken a lot of your time. It's been
Oh,
it's been a good conversation.
Let's wrap it up. My cat's on my lap and falling off and clawing me as we speak, trying to maintain. So, but there we go. That is Mr. Lafayette Lee. You can, well, he writes. We'll leave the Twitter
I
off.
try
Okay.
to.
Yes. And where do you write at?
I'm over at ruins.substack.com. I made it into a domain called LafayetteLee.com. I'm
Nice.
doing some writing over there, but the big one is I am 1776. I'm a
Yep.
managing editor over there. So come on over and check it out.
Do that. Follow him there, and you can. Well, when he gets back to Twitter, if he does, he's got some good tweets. So that's us. We thank Mr. Lafayette Lee for hanging out with us, slumming with us on There Will Be Bourbon, drinking the Devil's Brigade. You guys have a great night.